What if I told you that the strongest predictor of global war isn't actually found in the assembly halls of the United Nations,
Right.
but it's actually in the way you speak to your spouse in the kitchen, or, the way you handle a frustrated toddler at 6 in the morning?
Yeah, which sounds wild at first.
It really does. Because usually when we talk about building a better, more peaceful world, there's this underlying assumption that we need macro engineering.
Exactly. We want the big solutions.
Right. We expect massive, sweeping treaties or complex global economic policies, historical precedents mapped out on some giant geopolitical board.
Because big problems clearly need big, sophisticated systems, right?
Exactly. That's what makes us feel safe. But today, we're going to look at a perspective that it completely upends that entire assumption.
It really flips the script.
It does. And I am thrilled you're joining us for this deep dive today because we are unpacking a highly specific and honestly highly controversial section of a document called The Blueprint of a Peaceful World.
And just for some context, the document as a whole is this sprawling, open-source architectural plan for a new civilization.
Yeah, it's massive.
It is. But the section we are focusing on today, it pretty much ignores all of that macro-level infrastructure. It takes the camera completely off the political stage and points it directly into your living room.
Literally right into your living room. Because we are placing our absolute unwavering focus entirely on one single paragraph from the manifesto's first version.
Item number 30.
Item number 30. And the premise of this item is titled, Family, a School of Trust.
I love that phrase.
Me too. The core argument being made here is that global peace does not begin at the negotiation table in Geneva. It begins at the kitchen table.
Right.
It frames the family unit not merely as, a biological necessity or just a social construct. It explicitly calls it a laboratory of peace.
Which is such an intentional word choice. So calling it a laboratory. It implies that peace is not just some passive state of being.
Right. It's not just sitting around doing nothing.
Exactly. A laboratory is a place of active experimentation.
Yeah.
You're establishing controlled conditions. You're observing reactions.
You're testing things out.
Yeah. So if the family is the laboratory of peace, it means peace is fundamentally a technology.
Oh, that's interesting. A technology.
Yeah, social technology that we have to actively develop and practice on a micro scale before we can ever, hope to deploy it on a macro scale.
That makes so much sense. And item 30, it comes out swinging right from the very first line.
It really pulls no punches.
No, it doesn't. It explicitly states peace begins in the family, and then it introduces this just striking rule. It says, one cannot be a peacemaker on the podium and a tyrant in the kitchen.
That line is just incredible.
The home should not be a battlefield. I immediately fixated on that podium versus kitchen metaphor.
It's extremely vivid.
It really paints this picture of intense cognitive dissonance. You can easily imagine a public figure, maybe a CEO or a politician.
Or even an activist, right?
Yes. An activist, someone who champions empathy and mental health awareness on social media. They're on the podium, they're getting the applause.
They're the face of justice.
Exactly. But then off camera, behind closed doors, they're systematically breaking down their partner's self-esteem.
Right.
Or they're, ruling their household through sheer intimidation.
They are the tyrant in the kitchen.
Right. So my question is this manifesto suggesting that our massive global conflicts are essentially just reflections of these private domestic hypocrisies scaled up?
Yes, that's exactly what it's saying. The text is demanding absolute congruence between public ideals and private realities.
Congruence, so matching up completely.
Right. If you advocate for nonviolence or justice or diplomacy in society, but you use intimidation, fear, or, emotional manipulation to control your own household, your version of peace is entirely performative.
It's just a show.
It is a facade. And from a psychological standpoint, that kind of compartmentalization is incredibly toxic.
Not just for the family, right?
Exactly. It's not just for the victims in the kitchen. It's toxic for the societal structure as a whole.
How so? Because, historically speaking, society has been very willing to overlook the private tyrannies of powerful people.
Oh, absolutely.
As long as they deliver on the public stage, we kind of look the other way. We say, well, separate the artist from the art.
Or the politician from their personal life.
Right. We essentially say, sure, they're a nightmare at home, but look at the treaties they signed. Look at the economy.
We do that. But the manifesto argues that this separation is a complete illusion. Let's actually break down the language it uses. It says, the home should not be a battlefield.
A battlefield.
Right. Now, a battlefield is a very specific psychological environment. It is a place of hypervigilance.
Because you could be attacked at any second.
Precisely. If you are on a battlefield, your singular goal is survival. You are constantly scanning your environment for threats.
Just looking around for danger?
Yeah, you're calculating the shifting moods of the people around you. You're forming temporary alliances just to avoid getting hurt.
Wow, yeah.
Your nervous system is locked in a sympathetic state. Fight, flight, or freeze.
You never actually get to put your armor down?
Never.
You might just be, I don't know, sitting on a couch watching television, but internally your radar is spinning wildly.
Exactly. So if you treat the home as a battlefield, you are inherently training the people within it, especially children, to view life as a continuous war.
You're raising them in the trenches.
That's exactly it. You are raising a generation in the trenches. When a child graduates from this so-called school of trust, they aren't graduating with a deep-seated belief in cooperation or mutual respect.
Because they've never seen it.
Right. They are graduating with a deeply ingrained, biologically wired belief that power equals domination, and vulnerability equals a profound risk to their safety.
That's terrifying.
They learn that to survive in this world, you must either be the tyrant or you will be the subjugated. There is no middle ground.
Think about the implications of that for a second. If you scale that up, I mean, you cannot build a sustainable, peaceful civilization out of individuals who are perpetually at war in their own minds.
Let alone in their own home.
Right. It doesn't matter how beautiful your architectural drawings for global peace are, or how elegant your treaties are.
No, it really doesn't.
If the fundamental building block of society, the human nervous system, which is shaped by the family, if that is wired for threat detection and coercion, society will inevitably default to coercion the moment it faces any real stress.
The structural integrity of the macro relies entirely on the structural integrity of the micro.
Wow.
That is the core thesis of item 30. And it's why the document immediately pivots to the actual mechanics of how we build that micro-level integrity.
Because we have to know how to actually do it.
Exactly. It introduces a concept that bridges the gap between developmental psychology and global security. It states that an atmosphere of safety in the family is created by practicing secure attachment.
Okay, this was the moment in the text that genuinely forced me to pause.
I figured it would.
Because secure attachment is a clinical term.
Yes, it is.
It belongs in a child psychology textbook or like a therapist's office. Seeing it dropped into the middle of a global peace manifesto is honestly jarring.
It's very unexpected.
Why rely on early childhood attachment theory to lay the groundwork for a peaceful civilization? Like, what is the connection there?
Well, it is unusual, but it is deeply, deeply scientifically literate. By invoking secure attachment, the text is leaning on decades of developmental psychology.
Like John Bowlby's stuff.
Exactly, the foundational work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. It's using that to explain the literal biological foundation of human trust. If the family is the school of trust, secure attachment is the core curriculum.
The core curriculum. Okay, let's explain that curriculum for the listener, because it's obviously not just about giving a child a hug.
Oh, no, it goes way deeper than that.
What exactly does secure attachment mean in this specific context, and how does it actually wire the brain?
Well, we have to look at how a human infant experiences reality. When a child is born, they have zero context for the world.
Right, they're a blank slate.
They don't know about governments or economics or social contracts. Their primary caregivers, their parents, they're not just people to them, they are a proxy for the entire universe.
That's intense. So the parent is the universe.
Literally.
So how the parent behaves is how the child assumes the universe operates.
Precisely. If the caregiver is responsive, if they soothe the child when they are distressed, if they feed them when they are hungry, and, provide a predictable safe haven,
Then they're doing a good job.
well, they're doing much more than just keeping the child alive. They are actively shaping the child's neurobiology.
Wow.
The child's amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, it learns to settle. The vagus nerve, which helps regulate the parasympathetic rest and digest system, it gains tone and resilience.
It's basically a physical workout for the brain's safety systems.
Yes. The brain physically wires itself to believe. The universe is fundamentally safe. The universe is reliable. When I am in distress, help will come. My needs matter.
So their baseline physiological state is just calm.
Yes.
The default setting is trust.
That is secure attachment. Safety in this context isn't just about having, locked doors and a solid roof over your head.
It's an internal safety.
It is a psychological and emotional atmosphere. It is the deep, unconscious knowledge that you do not have to fight for your right to exist or be comforted.
But, okay, what happens when the universe, meaning the caregiver, is unpredictable? Or worse, what if the caregiver is that tyrant in the kitchen?
That's where things break down.
Right. If the parent is the source of terror, how does that alter the curriculum in this school of trust?
It creates a catastrophic biological paradox for the child.
A paradox.
Think about it. The child's survival instincts tell them to flee from a source of danger, but their attachment instincts tell them they must run toward their caregiver to survive.
Oh, wow.
When the caregiver is the danger, the child's nervous system is completely trapped. It cannot fight, and it cannot flee.
So it just shorts out.
Essentially, yes. It wires itself for perpetual survival. It learns that the universe is hostile, that relationships are inherently dangerous, and that trust is a lethal liability.
A lethal liability.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in clinical terms, this develops into what we call insecure or disorganized attachment.
So the child's baseline becomes hypervigilance. They're basically living in the battlefield, anticipating an attack, even when the room is totally quiet.
And here is the mechanism that connects this directly to the Peace Manifesto. A child who never experiences an atmosphere of safety at home eventually grows up and graduates into society.
Right.
But they view the world through a lens of constant threat. When your baseline is fear, you interpret even neutral interactions as aggressive.
Like someone just bumping into you on the street.
Exactly. You become highly reactive, you struggle to regulate your emotions, and you perceive differences of opinion as existential attacks.
Man, if we extrapolate that deeply personal psychological mechanism to a societal level, the picture gets very dark.
Very dark.
You end up with a population of hypervigilant, traumatized adults. And traumatized populations don't exactly vote for nuance or diplomacy or complex peace processes.
No, they don't.
Yep.
They vote for whoever promises to eliminate the threat.
Because they just want the fear to stop.
They crave certainty above all else. Authoritarianism almost always appeals to the disorganized attachment of a population.
Oh, that makes total sense.
A demagogue will point to an imagined enemy and say, "The world is terrifying, but I am strong enough to protect you. Give me your power, and I will keep you safe."
And if you're terrified, you take that deal every time.
But if you have a society deeply rooted in secure attachment, that rhetoric falls flat.
Because their baseline is not terror.
Right. They have the emotional regulation to look at a complex issue and say, we can navigate this without resorting to violence.
They don't need a savior.
Exactly. But here's the catch. You cannot legislate that kind of emotional regulation from the top down.
Right. You can't just mandate a calm nervous system via a UN resolution.
No, you have to engineer it in the living room.
That reframes the entire concept of parenting. I mean, it elevates it from this private family matter to the literal front lines of global security.
It is the front line.
Which brings us to a massive practical hurdle.
Let's hear it.
If the goal is to create this atmosphere of safety and secure attachment, how is a parent actually supposed to lead?
That's the big question.
Because, I mean, let's be real, children need rules.
Yeah.
They need boundaries. Item 30 introduces a concept to address this called the new authority.
Yes.
It explicitly redefines parental strength. It says that authority is not found in control and coercion, but rather in presence, self-control, and a support network.
The new authority is where this document directly challenges, frankly, thousands of years of cultural assumptions about power.
Yeah, it throws out the old rulebook entirely.
For centuries, across the globe, parental authority, and by extension state authority, has been synonymous with coercive control.
Right. The underlying logic has always been, you must comply with my demands because I am larger than you, or because I control the resources.
Or because I will inflict physical or emotional pain on you if you disobey.
The classic. Because I said so, and if you argue, there will be consequences approach.
Exactly.
Well, I have to push back here, because I can hear the skepticism from a mile away from anyone listening who has kids.
Oh, sure.
If a parent completely strips away control and coercion, don't they just become a pushover? Like, let's use a practical analogy. Think of a ship's captain.
Okay, a ship's captain.
If the captain isn't giving strict orders, if there's no hierarchy and no fear of the brig, doesn't the ship just sink the moment a storm hits?
It seems like it would.
Like, if a toddler is sprinting toward a busy street or a teenager is engaging in highly destructive behavior, I'm not going to sit back and quietly radiate presence.
No, of course not.
I am going to exert immediate physical control.
Right. And that is the most common critique of non-coercive authority.
Mm-hmm.
But it really relies on a misunderstanding of what coercion actually is.
Okay, walk me through that.
The Manifesto is not advocating for permissive parenting. It is not advocating for anarchy or neglect in the face of absolute danger.
So you do stop the toddler?
Yes. Grabbing a toddler who is running into traffic is not coercion.
Yeah.
It is a protective boundary.
Okay. So where is the line between a boundary and coercion?
The distinction lies in what happens next.
Yeah.
You grab the toddler, you pull them back from the street. You have kept them safe. That is the boundary.
Right.
Coercion is what often follows. Do you grab them, pull them back, and then violently shake them? Do you scream at them? Do you tell them they are stupid for running away?
You use the fear.
Exactly.
Right.
Do you use your physical dominance to induce a state of terror in the child so they never do it again? That is coercion.
Wow.
Coercion relies on the threat of violence or the withdrawal of love to force compliance.
But it looks like strength. I mean, when a parent screams and a child immediately stops what they're doing out of sheer fear, from the outside, it looks like effective control.
It looks dominant, yes, but it is incredibly brittle. Brittle. How so?
It's a shortcut. If your only tool for generating compliance is fear, what happens when that child grows into a teenager who is physically larger than you and who is no longer afraid of your anger?
You have absolutely no authority left.
None. True authority, this new authority the text describes, is not brittle. It is derived from 3 specific pillars.
Okay, let's go through those. The first is presence.
Right.
Let's examine presence, because practically speaking, I can be physically present in the room with my family while, scrolling on my phone or staring at a television, completely disconnected from what's happening.
We all do it.
Right. I am physically there, but I really don't think that's what the Manifesto means by presence.
You're right, it isn't. Physical proximity is not presence. Presence, in this context, means being deeply engaged, observant, and emotionally tethered to the child.
Emotionally tethered.
It means the child knows, at a cellular level, you are seen, you are heard, and I am not abandoning this relationship, even when you are behaving horribly.
So it's unconditional. Exactly. Think back to your ship analogy. It is the captain standing at the helm during a massive storm, looking at the crew and saying, I see this storm, it is terrifying, but I am at the wheel and I am not leaving my post.
That unwavering steadiness.
Yes. That steadiness is profoundly regulating for a panicked child.
So presence is the anchor. You're just communicating stability.
What's the first pillar?
What is the second pillar?
Self-control. And this is arguably the most demanding aspect of the new authority.
I believe it.
The text demands that the adult regulate their own nervous system before they attempt to regulate the child's.
That's hard.
It's incredibly hard. Let's return to the ship again. If the captain is running around the deck, screaming in panic, lashing out at the crew, and wildly demanding they fix the sails, is that a display of authority?
No, that's just adding chaos to the storm. Now, the crew isn't just terrified of the weather. They're terrified of their unpredictable captain.
Exactly. If a parent regularly loses their temper to enforce the rules, they're teaching the child a very dangerous lesson.
That whoever yells the loudest wins.
Yes. They are modeling that whoever is the most aggressive wins. They are teaching that when you feel frustrated, the appropriate adult response is to lash out.
Which is the exact opposite of what we want.
True self-control means holding a firm boundary without losing your emotional center. It is saying, I will not let you hit your brother, and I will physically step between you to stop it, but I'm not going to demean you, scream at you, or threaten you while I do it.
I am in control of myself.
Exactly.
So the authority comes from the boundary, but the new part of the authority is enforcing it without resorting to rage or emotional manipulation.
You got it.
It essentially requires the parent to act like a fully regulated adult at all times.
It does.
Which, let's be honest, sounds great in theory.
But in practice?
Yeah, in practice, when you're running on 3 hours of sleep and, you have a deadline looming at work and your kid decides to have a catastrophic meltdown in the middle of a grocery store at 6 a.m. over a box of cereal.
They've all been there.
Maintaining that Zen-like self-control feels less like a parenting strategy and more like a superpower.
It really does.
It almost feels like an impossible standard to uphold.
Well, it is an impossible standard if you're trying to do it alone. The biological limits of the human nervous system are real. Sleep deprivation, financial stress, and chronic isolation. They actively degrade our ability to exercise self-control.
You literally don't have the bandwidth.
Exactly. And the authors of this text clearly understood the biology of stress because they included the third critical pillar of the new authority,
A support network.
the support network.
Yes, presence, self-control, and a support network. I found the inclusion of a support network fascinating when I read it,
It's vital.
because we don't usually think of community as a component of personal authority. Why is it explicitly listed here as part of authority?
Because healthy authority is never isolated. It is never a closed-loop dictatorship. The concept of the nuclear family, two parents or a single parent, alone in a house, entirely responsible for the physical, emotional, and psychological development of children with no outside help.
Which is how most of us live now.
It is, but it's a very modern and historically anomalous experiment. For most of human history, we relied on alloparenting.
Alloparenting, so like the village.
Yes, we raised children in villages with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and neighbors all sharing the load.
The village distributed the stress.
Precisely. If a parent is alone in a house with a screaming toddler day after day, with no break, no community, no outlet, that parent's nervous system will eventually redline.
They're going to break.
They will inevitably default to coercion and screaming, not because they are evil, but because they are completely exhausted. They drop into survival mode.
The battlefield mentality again.
Right. The Manifesto recognizes that to maintain presence and self-control, parents require a network. They need structural support.
By baking the support network into the definition of authority, the text is quietly making a really radical political statement.
It absolutely is.
It is decentralizing the power of the parent. And it's acknowledging that raising a child who is capable of sustaining global peace is not a solo project.
It cannot be.
It's a collective societal responsibility. The community basically acts as a failsafe against the kitchen becoming a tyranny.
Yes. It takes the crushing pressure off the individual to be this perfect, isolated deity in their home and reintegrates the family back into the fabric of a supportive society.
So the new paradigm of power is, I am steadfastly present. I am managing my own emotional reactivity. And I am leaning on my community so that I have the energetic capacity to do both.
That is the complete architecture of the new authority.
It is a beautiful architecture for a family, but the manifesto doesn't stop at the ideal.
No, it has to deal with reality.
Because once you establish what healthy, non-coercive authority looks like, you are kind of forced to address what happens when that authority is violently violated.
And unfortunately, it often is.
This is where the tone of item 30 shifts drastically from like a psychological framework to a strict, uncompromising operational directive. We move into the security protocol.
And this protocol is where the text draws a hard line in the sand regarding human behavior.
A very hard line. The text states, safety first, then reconciliation. We declare zero tolerance for domestic violence.
Zero tolerance.
It is an incredibly stark boundary to place in a document that is fundamentally about bringing humanity together.
It is, but it's essential.
When I read safety first, then reconciliation, I immediately thought of international warfare.
That's the perfect parallel.
If two nations are locked in a brutal conflict, you cannot reasonably ask the diplomats to sit down at a table and negotiate a lasting peace treaty while one side is still actively dropping bombs on the other's hospitals.
It's an absurd expectation.
The shelling has to stop. Absolute physical safety has to be established before you can even begin to whisper the word reconciliation.
It is the basic logic of conflict resolution. Yet, what the manifesto is doing here is applying that exact macro logic directly to the living room.
Right.
It highlights a massive cultural blind spot because in everyday social dynamics, society frequently operates on the exact opposite principle when dealing with family conflict.
Wait, what do you mean? How does society operate in reverse?
Consider the immense, suffocating cultural pressure we often place on victims of family dysfunction.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Whether it's emotional abuse or even physical domestic violence, the overarching narrative is almost always geared toward preserving the outward appearance of the family unit at all costs.
Right, keep the peace at all costs.
Exactly. The pressure is on the victim to forgive and forget or to be the bigger person.
We hear phrases like, well, she's still your mother.
Or, he's still your husband. Don't break up the home over this.
The burden of maintaining the illusion of peace is placed squarely on the shoulders of the person being harmed.
It's incredibly unfair.
They are asked to absorb the abuse, to swallow their trauma, just so that everyone else can feel comfortable at Thanksgiving dinner.
It is what psychologists often refer to as toxic forgiveness. And the manifesto explicitly forbids this dangerous shortcut.
It just cuts it out completely.
Yes. It argues that you cannot urge a victim to make peace with an abuser until physical and psychological safety are absolutely guaranteed.
It's calling out the profound immorality of demanding reconciliation while a threat is still active.
Because if you force a victim to reconcile with someone who is actively harming them, or who hasn't taken an ounce of accountability or changed their behavior, you aren't creating peace.
No, you're not.
You are just forcing the victim to be complicit in their own subjugation.
Let's go back to the text's metaphor of the family as a laboratory of peace.
Okay.
Think about how a literal scientific laboratory functions. To run an experiment, you need sterile, controlled, and safe conditions.
Right. You need a clean environment.
If the laboratory is contaminated, like if there's a toxic gas leak or the room is literally on fire, you cannot run an experiment on trust or secure attachment. The laboratory is compromised.
Exactly. You can't practice the new authority while someone is throwing plates at your head.
You just can't.
By stating safety first, then reconciliation, the manifesto is making it clear that true peace is inextricably linked to justice and accountability.
You can't have one without the other.
No. You cannot bypass the messy, difficult, and highly disruptive process of establishing boundaries. If an abuser is in the home, the priority is not hugging and making up.
The priority is extraction.
Exactly. The priority is establishing a physical and psychological barrier. It is only when the victim's nervous system can finally truly register that the threat is gone.
When the vagus nerve can engage and the cortisol levels actually drop.
Yes, only then can the complex, long-term work of healing and perhaps eventual reconciliation even begin to be discussed.
That protocol is so deeply validating.
It really is.
For anyone listening who has ever felt guilty for cutting ties with a toxic family member, the manifesto is essentially saying, you were right.
Your safety is the mandatory prerequisite for peace.
Not the sacrificial lamb for it. It elevates domestic safety from this private, shameful family secret to a matter of global structural integrity.
It treats domestic abuse not as a personal failing, but as a breach of the foundational peace treaty of civilization.
Which naturally brings us to the final echoing sentence of item 30.
The conclusion.
Up to this point, we have talked about the obvious tyrants, we've talked about physical violence, the overt battlefield, and the necessity of extraction.
The loud stuff.
Right, the loud stuff. But the final line pushes our understanding of violence and peace much, much deeper. It reads, true peace cannot be built on the suppression of the weak.
This line requires us to fundamentally expand our definition of what violence actually is and what peace looks like in practice.
Because suppression of the weak isn't necessarily about someone throwing punches.
No, it rarely is.
It can be incredibly insidious. I want to look at the quiet households.
Okay.
Imagine a home where no voices are ever raised, there is no physical violence. From the outside, looking through the window, it appears to be a model of domestic tranquility.
The perfect family.
Exactly. But inside, that quiet is maintained because one person is systematically shrinking themselves.
They are walking on eggshells.
Yes, they are constantly molding their personality to appease the volatile moods of their partner. They never express their own needs, their own desires, or their own boundaries.
Because experience has taught them that asserting themselves will lead to inviolable friction.
Or passive aggression or emotional withdrawal. The house is completely quiet, but is it peaceful?
It is crucial to distinguish between what the sociologist Johann Galtung called negative peace and positive peace.
Okay, what's the difference?
What you are describing, the house where everyone walks on eggshells to avoid triggering a mood, is negative peace.
What?
It is defined solely by the absence of visible conflict.
So it's just the absence of fighting.
Right. It is quiet, but it's the quiet of a hostage situation. It is quiet because someone's spirit is being actively suppressed.
The peace is bought and paid for by one person's silence.
And returning to the laboratory metaphor, if the experiment relies on one person entirely subordinating their identity to appease another, the result is not peace.
It's subjugation.
It is a slow, quiet crushing of human agency. The manifesto makes a definitive statement. True peace cannot be built on that foundation. It is an unstable architecture.
Let's dig into the why of that. Practically speaking, if the suppression keeps the household quiet and prevents outward arguments, why is it so inherently dangerous to the larger goal of a peaceful world?
Because suppressed human energy does not simply evaporate, it metastasizes.
Metastasizes, like a disease.
Yes, a person who is constantly suppressing their needs, swallowing their voice, and living in a state of hypervigilant appeasement is living under immense chronic stress.
That's got to take a toll.
The physiological toll of walking on eggshells, we call the allostatic load, is devastating.
They might get actually sick.
They often do. They may develop severe autoimmune diseases, chronic pain, or severe depression, which eventually impacts the broader community and healthcare systems.
The body keeps the score, as the saying goes.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
But even more dangerously for society, that suppressed anger often finds a different outlet.
It gets redirected.
It is displaced. The person who's dominated at home may unconsciously seek to dominate someone else where they feel they have power.
Oh, wow.
Perhaps a subordinate at work, a cashier at the grocery store, or, tragically, their own children.
So it creates a chain reaction.
Exactly. Violence, even emotional violence, trickles down the hierarchy of power. Furthermore, if children are observing this quiet subjugation,
If they see that peace just means one person hiding themselves.
right, if they see one person dominating the emotional climate and another person shrinking to accommodate it, they internalize a completely distorted model of human relationships.
They learn that in any dynamic, there is a winner and a loser, an oppressor and an oppressed. They never see a model of equitable partnership, a place where two people can disagree safely, negotiate, and reach a compromise without someone having to literally disappear.
Exactly. So, if we synthesize everything we have unpacked from this single paragraph, we arrive at a profound redefinition of peace.
A much more demanding definition.
True peace, as envisioned by item 30, is not passive. It is not just sitting quietly in a room and avoiding arguments at all costs.
True peace is highly active.
It is resilient. It can even be a bit noisy. True peace requires negotiation, it requires the setting of firm boundaries, and it requires the continuous conscious practice of presence, self-control, and an unwavering safety.
It is inherently equitable.
It means every voice in that kitchen matters, and no one has to shrink to keep the room quiet.
It is an incredibly demanding vision. Let's take a breath and just zoom out for a second because we have covered immense ground from just a few lines of text today.
We really have.
We started with this vast, ambitious blueprint of a peaceful world. But by focusing entirely on the internal concepts of item 30, we've seen how the grand macro-level ambition of global peace is entirely dependent on the microscopic daily interactions happening in our living rooms.
It fundamentally shifts the locus of control. It strips away the excuse that peace is the responsibility of politicians and diplomats alone.
It brings it right to our doorstep.
It tells us that we are all, at this exact moment, actively participating in either the construction or the destruction of global peace, based entirely on how we treat the people closest to us.
We explored the sheer hypocrisy of the podium versus the kitchen, realizing that our public ideals are basically meaningless if our private spaces are battlefields.
We dug into the biological and clinical reality of secure attachment.
Right. Understanding that providing a consistent, emotionally safe environment for a child literally wires their nervous system to reject preemptive violence and authoritarian fear later in life.
We dismantled the archaic myths of power, redefining parental and structural authority.
We learned it's not about coercion or instilling fear. It's about the rigorous, exhausting practice of presence, self-control, and relying on a vital community support network.
We confronted the uncompromising security protocol, the absolute non-negotiable necessity of safety first, then reconciliation.
We rejected the toxic cultural pressure of forced forgiveness that traps victims in dangerous environments.
And finally, we dismantled the illusion of negative peace.
We learned that a quiet house is not a peaceful house if that quiet is bought with the suppression of the weak. The true blueprint for a better world doesn't start at the UN Assembly. It starts in your home.
It is the ultimate democratization of peacemaking. You do not need a degree in international relations or a seat in a parliament to build the new world.
You just need to be present, regulated, safe, and equitable in your own home.
If enough people do that, the macro structure builds itself.
The democratization of peacemaking, that is a truly powerful framework.
It gives everyone a role to play.
It really does. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you move through your week.
Think about the architecture of your own life.
We started by talking about looking at the molecular bonds instead of the skyline. So I challenge you to look at those bonds. Think about the quietest relationships in your life right now, the ones where there is never any visible conflict.
Ask yourself why they're quiet.
Exactly. Are they quiet because there is an atmosphere of true, secure trust? Are they quiet because both of you feel completely safe, securely attached, and deeply respected?
Or is there another reason?
Or are they quiet because you, or someone else, has mistaken the suppression of the weak for keeping the peace? Are they quiet because someone is constantly walking on eggshells to avoid waking the tyrant in the kitchen?
It's a heavy question.
It is. But before you set out to change the world, before you get on a podium to preach about how others should behave, take a long, hard look at your kitchen.
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to unpack another layer of the world around us. Stay curious.